week's episode of our show has been sponsored by Fables 2, Pirates of the Ethereal Expanse.
This second installment in the Fables franchise has you set sail into a magical ocean, taking up your pirate-themed campaign and going out on great adventures in this mystical, magical, almost space-like ocean.
We were super excited by the trailer, and you should definitely check it out in the links below, because Pirates of the Ethereal Sea is an amazing blend of high piracy and high magic.
I have tried to run several pirate-themed campaigns. I'm a big fan of them, and I gotta say the inspiration here is top-notch. I was really excited just watching the trailer and can't wait to see what's in store in these next upcoming chapters.
Each fable is broken into 6 chapters, and you get a new adventure every month to download. They come with everything that you need to run it, including digital maps and tokens and tools. So whether you're playing in person or online, it's a perfect way to have a new campaign to play every 6 months.
So check the links below, watch the trailer. This is definitely one to keep your eyes on.
Thanks so much to Fables 2 and Ghostfire Games for sponsoring this episode. Things like this help us do what we do here on YouTube.
And now on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for GMs.
We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Hold your nose, because these feats stink. We're talking about the worst feats your character can choose in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
One of my favorite parts of Dungeons & Dragons is the ability to choose feats to help customize your character. They add a lot of versatility to the game and allow you to really build your character in a way that speaks to who you want them to be. There's a lot of feats out there now to choose from, and I think that some of them are incredible and really define your character. Others might have some good flavor, but mechanically speaking, don't actually add a lot.
So today, we're going to take a look at 5 of the worst feats that have been introduced for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, talk about why they are really not worth taking for your character, except maybe in very niche situations, and what we would do if we were rewriting or redesigning these feats or house ruling them for our campaigns.
There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling. Before we jump into this episode, I do want to say that I have heard arguments for why so many feats that I don't think are very good might be really good on a certain character. And as usual, Monty and I are very much supporters of the idea of playing the character that you want to play. And if a certain feat, even one that we mentioned in this video, helps bring the character that you want to play to life for you, then by all means, you should choose it. What we're trying to get to the bottom of here with the feats that we're choosing is looking at feats that we think you might be better off just role-playing the concept and adding flavor text and choosing maybe a different feat, in our opinion. But there's arguments to go any direction here.
With that said, the first feat we're going to take a look at today is Charger. Now this feat, as written, allows your character to take an attack or shove as a bonus action after you take the dash action on your turn, and if you move straight towards an enemy and then attack them using this feature, you deal extra damage if that melee attack hits, or can choose to shove that target further back. That's all the feat does. And that alone, I think if we just analyze this feat from the more recent design iterations, it just feels like you're not getting a lot for your buck.
It feels like there's actually a list of requirements to make this feat work. Mm-hmm. You are probably only going to use Charger if you're starting the combat encounter too far away from the enemy and you need to take the dash action in order to get in. So already, this is not every combat encounter, it's some combat encounters, and usually you're only using the feat on the first round of combat because you're too far away.
At low levels of play, Charger is actually not that terrible before your characters get things like extra attack, because what Charger is allowing you to do is still attack when you take the dash action. The problem with this is it's only a single attack. So if you're a character like a fighter or a barbarian or a paladin, you are trading one of your attacks or more of your attacks plus a bonus action for that extra bit of movement to close the distance. While that is useful, there are so many other ways to close the gap. Maybe relying on your party members for teamwork would probably be my favorite one, or using a spell or another feature or something like this, that spending one of your precious few feat slots to address an ability that maybe is only going to be relevant in the first round of combat, and even then maybe not relevant in every combat at all, is a pretty high cost to pay.
Bottom line is that when you look at this feat, it's not that it's necessarily the worst feat. It's that as you narrow down the cases in which this feat is useful, it just doesn't add up to being a great choice for one of the few feat choices that we have, when there's so many other feats out there that are continually useful over and over again. Not only is this circumstance not coming up in every game, but the requirement also to move 10 feet in a straight line actually stops you from being able to weave through enemies or anything of that nature to get to the enemy you want to attack. There's just enough caveats to the usefulness of this that I just feel like you're better off choosing something different.
This feat is a great example of one of those feats that probably should be a half feat and grant a +1 bonus to an ability score like Strength. In that respect, you'd still get the ability score increase. It would be great for rounding up an ability score increase. And then you'd get this useful ability that is useful some of the time, but at least the other half of the feat is something that you were going to do anyways, boost up your Strength or Dexterity score. That said, I still feel that the application of the feat is narrowly worded, and I could see borrowing another bit of rules text from a monster to apply to this feat instead. The Orc stat block has an ability called Aggressive, which allows an Orc to dash as a bonus action as long as they're dashing towards a hostile enemy they can see. Having used many orcs in my time of playing D&D 5e, this is a very thematic ability that feels like the orcs are charging you. And I think that just simply making the charger feat, yeah, you can dash as a bonus action as long as you're going towards an enemy that you can see, would be perfect. It would make it far more flexible and usable in many more contexts, and the +1 to your Strength would mean it's a pretty easy justification to pick up. If that seems a little bit too powerful, maybe we could even just say that you don't dash, but you move half your speed towards a target that you could see. But even in that case, I compared this to a feat like Mobile, which is a +10 movement bonus all the time for no action or requirement required. And it's kind of like, why wouldn't I just take Mobile?
I think that the way that the charger feat is worded involving shoving an enemy, it could be finessed a little bit, and I think that it should be more available for the shove action, and I also think we should look at knocking targets prone, maybe charging through people. I think that there's a lot of ways that you can play with the charger also doing something maybe akin to the way that the Totem Barbarian has the late level Elk totem that allows them to charge through enemies, knocking people in their path prone. I don't quite know where that fits in with everything else we've discussed, but it is something that I would be interested in seeing in a charger feat. So those are small ways that I would look to improve this.
Moving along, our next feat is one that I did have a player in one of my campaigns take, and it saved their life. And this is the Dungeon Delver feat. This feat gives your character advantage on their ability to detect traps, to make their saving throws against traps, but quite notably, it also gives them the resistance to the damage from traps. And so in a dungeon delving heavy campaign, maybe there's an argument. Why is this the worst feat? Obviously, if you're running Tomb of Annihilation, or obviously if you are playing Dungeon of the Mad Mage, wouldn't this feat be S tier in those adventures? And I'll tell you, having run those adventures for a player that had the Dungeon Delver feat, the answer is a resounding no. It comes up surprisingly less often than you would imagine because of just the mechanics of how traps are integrated with puzzles, how traps are integrated with spells, and who often is the one detecting and going after the trap. There was one notable case where the player in question did survive a death trap that would have otherwise killed them instantly because of this feat. But that happened once in the entire Tomb of Annihilation campaign.
And Tomb of Annihilation is really the campaign that you think it would come up all the time.
Yeah.
I do think that Dungeon Delver is one of those feats that the reason why it's making the list specifically is because when you read it, it actually sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Everything that it's offering you is good. It's just the way that 5e interacts with traps doesn't lend itself to the Dungeon Delver feat. Now again, this could be DM and campaign dependent. Maybe your DM lets the Dungeon Delver character search for traps all the time and is constantly reminding them to look for them and helping them use their feat effectively. But I think if that's not the case, there's, again, enough of a list of things that need to occur for this feat to be useful that you would have been better off picking something different.
Yeah.
It's hard to say what I would do to improve this feat. Again, when in doubt, I think giving this feat a +1 to wisdom or +1 to intelligence would have benefited it a little bit, just to make you more aware. Even implementing something like a limited version of evasion or uncanny dodge, borrowing from the rogue, but giving it to the feat, I think actually really helps out here. And the reason for that is because oftentimes when we look at traps, they involve things like flames shooting out of the wall or things that are going to require dexterity saves or things of that nature. I think that would be a great way to improve this feat.
Yeah, we did mention this feat in our video about disarming traps without a rogue as a potentially useful feat. So it's not to say that this feat is useless. It's just very narrow in the wrong campaigns especially. At least there was a chance for this feat to be useful in Tomb of Annihilation or in Dungeon of the Mad Mage. There's maybe a handful of traps in Castle Ravenloft that are really, really nasty, but there are more recent D&D adventures that really don't have a lot of traps in them at all. And so this feat itself could be a bit of a trap in those cases.
The next feat is one that we've actually seen come to life in our campaign, and then not too far after that get traded out for a different feat, and that is Mage Slayer. So the way that Mage Slayer works is that when you're within 5 feet of an enemy spellcaster, if they cast a spell, you can use your reaction to basically take an opportunity attack against them. If you hit them while they're concentrating on a spell, they have disadvantage on their Constitution saving throw to maintain concentration, and if they cast a spell on you and you're within 5 feet of them, you have advantage on the saving throw. Now, already this was a bit of a middling feat for me. Oftentimes, being within 5 feet of a spellcaster and they're casting a spell on you is something that doesn't come up all the time, maybe if you're the fighter who is trying to get in melee combat, but usually getting to the spellcaster is tough, and usually the spellcaster is one of the primary villains of the campaign, and unless you're in a campaign where your DM is throwing tons of spellcasters at you, it's not really the most useful spell. Now, what makes this feat drop down a few pegs for us is actually in recent publications like Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse, we've seen a change in the way that monster stat blocks work, especially involving spellcasting. A lot of times, the spellcasting mechanic has been stripped away, and instead, the spellcasting enemies gain abilities that mimic spellcasting, sometimes even removing the concentration element from spells that might stay in effect. Unless this feat is tweaked in later publications, I don't think it works as well, especially not anymore, and I don't think it's worth taking because of the way that spellcasting is working on enemy stat blocks.
Yeah, I think that this is the biggest reduction in the stock of the Mage Slayer feat. It was pretty niche to begin with in that it does require, to get most of the use out of it, you have to be up in the grill of a spellcaster and attacking them. And I would say in a lot of cases, once you as the fighter or the Mage Slayer are in the position to do that, you might be able to one-round them anyways. Usually by the time the fighter or the paladin gets toe-to-toe with that spellcaster, unless it's like the boss of the entire campaign, that spellcaster can go down pretty quickly. And one of the things that I feel like I wish this feat had was that it actually interrupted spellcasting. It would be so cool if you hit somebody as a reaction when they're casting a spell, and now there's a chance that you counterspell them. And I think that that fits the image of what people want from a Mage Slayer feat. They want to interrupt the spellcasting. I definitely think with Joe, that was why he retrained the feat out, because he wanted to be able to interrupt spellcasters and stop the spell from going off, rather than just being able to hit them for a little bit of extra damage. In a lot of cases, a lot of spellcasting enemies as well, particularly monsters in 5th edition and boss monsters, they also have all these really tricky things. Like, for example, there's a ton of legendary monsters that are spellcasters that can teleport in a non-spell manner as a legendary action or a bonus action. So that's the other thing that kind of tactically, when we look at like the meta of fifth edition, that many spellcasting enemies are, it's very easy for them to get away from you and then still hit you with a spell or hit you with something that's not even a spell at all. So I don't know, it just feels like a pretty low pick for me.
I think that if I was improving Mage Slayer, I would want it to not be limited to within 5 feet. I would love to see an archer be able to shoot the spellcasting focus out of the hand of the spellcaster, not in a disarming strike sort of way, but for flavor text purposes. It's like being able to interrupt the spell with a crossbow or a bow, being able to, when you hit them with a reaction, it has a chance of basically making the spell fail. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be really an important attribute to this. Remove the fact that it needs to be in melee combat. Remove the fact that it doesn't actually stop the spell from going off. Make that part of it, and I think it would be worth taking.
Yeah, and the other part of this feat that is the magic resistance trait, but only when you're adjacent to the spellcaster, is a really tricky one to solve. Because I think that if there was just a feat that gave a character magic resistance, maybe it's too good.
That's the thing, is I didn't want to say that because it's too powerful, but I feel like there's got to be an in-between somewhere.
There does need to be a better medium that makes this more broadly applicable and allows more options to be had when using it.
Next up, we come to a feat that I want really badly to adore, but I just don't, and that is the Poisoner feat. And, I mean, we love poison spells. We love the idea of poison damage. Sadly, 5th edition doesn't love poison damage.
No.
And really wants all of their monsters to not worry about it, ever.
We did a search on D&D Beyond's monster filter, and we looked for monsters that are official that have immunity to poison. And I think we found over 500.
Yeah.
And this feat does nothing against monsters that are immune to poison. So things like constructs, undead, and as well devils, sometimes demons, they tend to be flat out immune to poison, and the Poisoner feat will not bypass those immunities. On the other hand, the number of monsters that are resistant to poison damage is much smaller. It's only about 100 monsters across all official 5th edition sources. And while this feat would be very useful in a political intrigue campaign where you were battling against a dwarven criminal syndicate, which actually is a pretty cool sounding campaign idea, the fact that this feat is very all or nothing and doesn't help you against any of the monsters that are immune to poison damage is a real knock against it, in my opinion. The second component of the feat, though, when it comes to crafting your own poison, on paper looks really good.
The things that I do like about Poisoner are I love a feat that lets you do something useful and create something during a rest or downtime. And being able to create a bunch of vials of poison, really cool. The poisons do decent damage and have a pretty okay DC that has to be beaten to avoid them for low level play. But again, on paper, you read it and you're like, this is awesome. As you get to higher levels, though, the DC doesn't scale.
Yeah, and that's kind of the catch-22 of it. It's a very strange feat because the DC is 14 flat, no matter what level you are. And it would be great if the DC scaled with something like your proficiency bonus, or why wouldn't you tie the DC to your proficiency in Poisoner's tools? Right? Like, doesn't that seem like the absolute natural fit there? Perhaps not allowing expertise, but again, it's hard to get expertise in tools in general. So I think that that's definitely one thing. Again, at low levels, that 2d8 extra damage is really good. And the fact that when you coat a melee weapon with it, it lasts for a minute is great, but then it only works on a single piece of ammunition. So I would really like it if you could use it on a melee weapon or several pieces of ammunition for each dose, so that it would help out a ranged character as well.
I know that it kind of takes away from reality, but I feel like if you apply poison to your ranged weapon for the next minute, same way as it does for the melee weapon, all of your bolts or all of your arrows are poisoned. Why are we taking away from the ranged weapon? Yeah,
even if the feat could just say you can poison 10 pieces of ammunition, and then it would be roughly equivalent to a minute. And if you could make multiple attacks, it would still even that out, because the advantage is, of course, that ranged weapons are at a distance.
I think the easy fixes here are make it so that it avoids resistance already, but make it so that immunity becomes resistance. Bam, already awesome. If we made it so that the DC scaled, and I would even look at higher levels, potentially having the damage scale, but I would have to work out exactly what the math is to make that work. But I could see having the DC and damage go up based on your level or your proficiency bonus or something. Everything else about the feat is great. It just needs those little boosts.
We have to be careful with increasing the damage, though, because, again, it's got this weird interaction with melee weapons where the poison lasts for 1 minute on a melee weapon, and that means that a fighter could potentially poison their sword and make a bunch of action surge attacks and get way more out of this feat compared to a rogue who's only making 1 attack per turn and getting that. Like, that's the other weirdness of this, is that it feels like it should be really good for a rogue, and yet a character who can make multiple melee attacks, curiously, this feat is really good for them.
The rogue is the first person you think of for a poisoner, but the fighter with 4 attacks is going to gain way more. I think that rather than upscaling the damage then, if we just made it, like we said earlier, apply to ranged weapons for a longer period of time or for more pieces of ammunition, that would fix it.
So the final feat that is just terrible and unredeemably so is Weapon Master. This is a feat that gives you a +1 bonus to an ability score, either strength or dexterity. And that's the best thing about it, because then you get proficiency with 4 weapons. And really, this feat is like saying, thank you, I would like half an ability score increase, please, and thank you.
Either you're a character that already has proficiency in most weapons, or you're a character who doesn't need proficiency in most weapons.
Yeah, it's really narrow. Like, I try to think, like, okay, is there some sort of Hexblade Warlock? But no, Hexblades get their weapon proficiencies. Bladesinger Wizards, I guess, get a very limited number of weapon proficiencies, but they usually make it work. So, like, what character is taking this feat?
If you're proficient with a weapon, does it get added to your roster for monk weapons?
No, it doesn't. So you can't even use this to increase the number of monk weapons that a monk could use. Ultimately, in 5th edition now, weapon proficiency is given out like candy. There's even the retraining your origin rules so that you can customize your origin to swap out proficiency in something for proficiency in a weapon or different types of weapons. So I think it's a little bit more restricted than that. So maybe you might not be able to trade weapon for skill or skill for weapon. But even then, there's so many subclasses that just give out full martial weapon proficiency like candy. There's virtually one for almost every single class in the game that will give you your martial weapon proficiencies. And most other classes that don't have full martial weapon proficiency have all the proficiencies they usually need for weapon combat.
Yeah, I can't see the wizard wanting to be proficient in great swords and halberds. Like,
it's just such a trap of a feat. Like, it makes someone who wants to have the image of using a specific weapon with their character. They are like, oh, I want to be able to play my life domain cleric that has a long sword. Let me take this feat for role-playing reasons. And
honestly, I would just let my cleric use a longsword.
Yeah, I would too.
I have this thing in D&D where they can take the stats of a weapon they're proficient in and then describe that weapon any way they want. If you're using a mace and you want to be like, it's a sword with blunt edges, I'll be like, cool.
Yeah.
Love it.
I know that there's a couple character builds out there that really have to think about the weapon proficiency problem, but most don't, and this feat is not the solution for those looking for it.
So these have been our top 5 worst feats in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you think that one of these should be replaced by a different feat that you think is worse, tell us which feat in the comments below.
And as we talked about, we tried to look at ways that these feats could be useful or used in some games or niche cases, so we would love to hear your comments about times that you did find these feats useful if you took them. Especially if you did take the Weapon Master feat and that became a very important part of your character in a relevant way. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Beyond that, the videos that we create on our channel are made possible because we have an amazing Patreon community supporting our work. And Kelly and I just want to extend our deepest gratitude to all of our patrons out there for making our work possible. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, you want to join our patron-only Discord community, consider following the links in the description below to check it out.
And if you want to see us use none of these feats, except Mage Slayer briefly, check out our live play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we have plenty more videos about character building in D&D 5e right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
In the dungeon.